Don't know if you've been listening to Cliff High, but he's been saying some very interesting things. He believes there's about to be some sort of disclosure, and of course the government UFOs, which I don't know why the change, they're both the same UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon I guess, but what that means is there are things flying around our skies that we've just ignored 4,000 of years, but they're probably airborne creatures that are very much like jellyfish. They're invisible to our normal light.
So the government is trying to disclose these unidentified aerial phenomenon. And what I believe these unidentified aerial phenomena are creatures that are airborne, that are invisible to our light spectrum eyes, but every so often will appear when there's infrared light or there's cloud cover, and they spook out the airline pilots. Well, these creatures are natural phenomenon or creatures that live in the air, just like we live on the terrestrial earth. And according to the Catholic Church, there have been creatures living in inner earth for thousands of years. Life teems all over creation.
Frequency of the human eye, but if you put them in infrared or perhaps under rain, storms and clouds, they appear much like a jellyfish would be invisible to the fish swimming below it, and in fact they say jellyfish are so invisible to normal fish in the sea that they have no natural predators except for a very prehistoric fish that swims clear at the bottom of the sea. So these aerial phenomenon might be very natural to our skies, but just have not been noticed that often.
So I'm identifying these unidentified aerial phenomenon as being similar to living in the ocean. You have different strata of ocean currents in which certain fish live. Now, the most prehistoric predator of the jellies, or the jellyfish, is a bottom creature that can never identify where the jellies are because the jellies are invisible to this creature's eyes. So we as terrestrial creatures made of materiality or asymmetric atoms cannot identify these invisible creatures that probably teem all through the areas of the globe in the air, but only every so often they come into view under cloud cover or under infrared spectrum light. And again, I'll say they spook the pilots because they don't know what these creatures are. And I think now with the technology we have, we can identify these creatures by shooting different laser beams into the air and suddenly they appear. Now, according to Cliff High, they have been researching the biochemical creatures that live within our brain system through psychedelics. Cliff High, as you know, was a military child, probably subjected to MK Ultra. He admits he's been previously diagnosed with schizophrenia, meaning he heard voices or had some auditory hallucinations. Without medication, he's unstable, perhaps. I don't know. I'm making a speculation here, only on what Cliff High has revealed. But Cliff High speaks in that, Illuminati cult-like speak. Okay, Terrence McKenna was also associated with the Stanford Research Institute, just like Cliff High is associated with the Stanford Research Institute and the Eselon cult-like recreational park where these scientists go and they engage, the rumor goes, they engage in orgies and have a sex magic visions, and they engage in psychedelics, and then they communicate with these beings that are across the chemical veil. These are electrochemical beings. They live in the chemistry of our brain chemistry in the neurons. All right? Life exists every place, even in the extreme volcanic reaches They're called extremophiles. There's not 1 square inch on this earth that is not teeming with life. Yes, you can go on these psychedelic trips and you'll communicate with these demonic type of electrochemical forces, which several psychologists and psychiatrists like Marzinski says these are demonic creatures. They've been creatures that have been identified for years. King Solomon actually cataloged them. I guess King Solomon could go on these ayahuasca type trips himself, and he cataloged all these demons, and they have been worshipped for thousands of years by the Masons, or the Y chromosome. Not the X chromosome, but the Y chromosomal monotheistic hermaphroditic creatures that I've talked about in the previous videos. Now, Cliff High calls this Abrahamic religion, Judeo-Christian religion, as being a cult of the Elohim, or the Elohim Cult. And of course, I was raised in an Elohim cult, the Mormon Utah church, in which Brigham Young believed that he was going to live forever in numerous lifetimes, that he was a god, that he'd come from different planets, and that all of us were going to become gods. And if we kept true to Brigham Young's totalitarian rule, that all the men would become gods of their own planets. Yes, this is how crazy the Elohim cults are. Well, what Cliff High is revealing, though, is that these religions of the Abrahamic origin appear to have been communicating through altered states and ayahuasca trips with these demons, and our world, our earth, have been controlled by instructions from this demonic other world. In other words, these Abrahamic men are not communicating with gods, but with demons, and our earth, our military, have been instructed, receiving their instructions from this demonic world, in which they call them psychonauts. They go into these altered states, then they return, and they write huge journals and notes of what these demonic creatures have instructed them. And then these instructions, I guess, are given to world leaders. Yes, we have been ruled, I know, by demonic beings. I once went to a seminar and they said, whatever is ruling this earth is not human. And my gosh, is Cliff High onto something? Have we been ruled by this underworld of demons who have sent back instructions with these psychonauts who call themselves Melchizedek priesthood, who have been writing notes and receiving instructions and then ruling our world from the instructions of these other world demons? Oh my goodness! What a mind-boggling notion that we have been receiving instruction from disembodied beings, that these psychonauts go on LSD trips. In the old days, it was some kind of ayahuasca psychedelics, and I think in ancient Egypt, they used the blue lotus, and they have been receiving their instructions from these disembodied biochemical beings that have absolutely no consciousness. They just talk to us in little crazy negative. It's been documented by Marzinski. They only want humans to die. And that's what our human culture has been ruled by. I think this is what Cliff High and Tucker Carlson are trying to reveal to us, that the cult of the Elohim are demonic forces that are communicating through other priesthoods, Melchizedek priesthood, the Masonic priesthood, and instructing ourselves to commit suicide. The earth and its creatures, that we are being instructed by these demonic forces to commit suicide. So we have we as women especially have to take away control of these demonic forces in that Y chromosome that's trying to regain their godhood. These demons are little munchkins. They're little munchkins. They have no power without man following their instructions. And men are so stupid. The men are following the instructions of these pygmy demonic beings. Oh, this is mind boggling.
Same with creatures that live at the bottom of the sea. We probably don't know 3/4 of the creatures that live in the sea. We don't know about probably 90% of the creatures that live in volcanoes, and they call these creatures that live in volcanoes extremophiles. In fact, you will find within our Earth biosphere every type of life living in every nook and cranny, every light frequency, every non-frequency. The Earth is teeming with life forms that we have yet to discover as humans. However, we have mythologies of creatures living in the earth, creatures living under the sea, creatures living on the moon. Even though we don't know what the moon is, I suspect the moon is a plasma disk that is just excess electrons that flow out every night and flow into the earth during the day. When the sun flows out with photons, the earth breathes the breeze and electrons freeze out, photons freeze in, photons breeze out electrons. And these are the plasma disk of electrons which make the moon, and photons which make the sun. Every 24 hours they're exchanging energy level, and the earth is actually, according to mythology, a living breathing being with the same sort of arterial system of blood, which is probably the oil squeezed under. Oil is plasma, and essentially plasma of the earth, of liquid rock. And so there are just many things that science number one has concealed, but religion is also concealed it. So if you listen to Cliff High, he is now talking in religious language. As you know, he was born of a military family. He's been pre-diagnosed. He's disclosed with schizophrenia. His brother committed suicide. I believe he disclosed that, in other words, as a military child he was probably subjected to MK Ultra mind control, and in fact he's associated with Stanford Research Institute, is associated with MK Ultra of the West. It's a military type operation. They run a salon, and they probably started the New Age movement. It came out of there. And remember, all the astronauts who became gurus also was associated with the Stanford Research Institute. One of the most famous psychonauts, which are early purveyors of LSD and going on trips and psychedelic trips and communing with these beings that exist once the psychedelics put you into a different frequency state. Terrence McKenna, one of our most famous psychonauts, or what you would call promoters of the LSD trip, died around 10 years ago, but Cliff High speaks in Terrence McKenna language. He talks about hyperdimensional space, which is where these LSD trippers go to when they are chemically induced to go to it. They have the commune with these creatures that live in this hyperdimensional space. Cliff High and Terrence McKenna use similar language. They call it hyper-novelty. But Terrence McKenna also believed in his ability to predict the future. He used the I Ching to do it. There's a lot of magical qualities about this anyway. These persons were subjected to government military MK Ultra mind control tactics. It's indoctrination. They go into meditative states, they do altered substances, and then the CIA would then indoctrinate these students that would go on these psychedelic trips. And these students would come back and disclose what they had seen in their psychedelic tricks. Well, it appears now that these alter states have been used by religions for thousands of years to go into alter states and commune with what many would call the lower demonic forces. They're chemically induced demons. They're electrochemical beings. They're not electromagnetic or photonic of light. Remember, light in Greek is lambda, not lamb like the blood of the lamb of the firstborn, but lambda, which means light, which means photons. The ancients knew that when somebody was electrocuted or was filled with light, they had downloads of communion from God. Therefore the lower beings, electrochemical beings, probably I believe come from the demonic lower beings and the chaos. Well, according to Cliff High, he calls them the Elohim Cult, the cult of the Elohim. And the Elohim, you know, it was in the gods of the Bible, and there were more than one God, and they said, let's make man in our own image. Well, the image that they made man into was not woman. Woman was the evil being that the devil impregnated, and they left the garden. And these Elohim followers, or the patriarchal male, which I believe is the double Y chromosome, has hated females ever since. That is why Lucifer, which is actually Venus, marked a huge war in the heavens, or when the earth fell off its axis and it was saved by Venus, who is a counter-rotating planet that goes counter to all the other planets, and I believe acts Like a rudder for the wobbling Earth or the gyroscopic Earth, which was thrown off its axis during a cataclysm probably 2,500 years ago, and this cataclysm is marked in the scars of the northern hemisphere, but also the fact that our North Star is visible in the sky and is attached to Venus, and our Southern Cross, which we can no longer see anymore cause it bulges outward, is at southern tail of the Earth, is attached to the rotation of Saturn or the hexagram, so we have a pentagram wobbling Earth. If you chart the way the head of the Earth, our skull, or go golfing out of the Christian Bible, Christ is the Earth, its code in the Bible, Christ is the Earth, and its skull reaches up to Venus or goes into a pentagram configuration as a gyroscope's because its southern hemisphere, or the Southern Cross, on which it has been anchored, goes into a hexagram, or they quote-unquote start of David's six-pointed star versus the five-pointed star. Therefore the southern part of humanity, pre-Adamic Adam, started with the Eve or the pentagram, the cataclysm, and the pre-Adamic man, which is the six-finger Saturnian man, has been out to destroy women and their offspring ever since. This is the Bible code. It has been a patriarchal double-Y genetics program to do away with wall men or man with a womb. Is my prediction, and I've my theory, and I did a series of videos on this, that their double Y was dying out, and in order to continue its offspring it had to cross the species barrier and mate with the five-fingered race of humans, or Eve, which they have despised ever since, but they've made it with Eve, and their offspring is what they like to call themselves, the hybrid Nephilim. Very crazy biblical stories, based on a literal take of the Garden of Eden. Mormons believe in the literalness of the Garden of Eden. Of course, Jews do not. The only time they start to believe in the literal Bible is starting with Moses, and Freud and many other thinking scholars believe that Moses of the Bible was actually Akhenaten, or the first monotheist in Egypt who was exiled with his monotheistic religion. If you look at nothing, he looks like a hermaphrodite, which is what the early version of Adam was. Adam cloned himself into a woman, or lose. Probably you can see now Genghis Khan, a whole civilization which they say 1/5 of all the white chromosomes in the Earth today has comes origin starts with Genghis Khan. Well, that's mathematically impossible unless Genghis Khan made it with 1/2 of the females living at that time. It is not true he cloned himself. These were actual clones. They're identical twins that clone themselves. I'm going to when woman appeared with the falling of Lucifer, the falling of Venus from the sky, the big war in heaven when Venus was falling to the earth or became visible in the sky. Women or men with wombs were discovered, or the five-fingered species, which is the human race. Therefore I predicted there's a six-fingered race. There are giants. Whether or not they're giants, they could, if they're born in Earth, they're going to be pygmies, but they like to call themselves giants, and I know several people who claim to have seen them. If you're high level, higher than Masons, I met a man, he called himself a builder, which comes from the Bilderberg group. They have seen these giants. There's very few of them left. They're Homo compenses, and that is what Cliff High talks about, Homo compenses, or the Caesarean Mafia when she calls them, but they come from this Mongol race out of the East Tibet and from the high mountains of the Himalayas, and this is where the religion was born. Also they believe they are hybrid gods and they're superior to the humans, and in fact they have a distinct hatred of humans, and this is some of the hybrid people I talk to. They despise humans and they want us dead. So these are the super soldiers that the Bilderbergs and the Vatican have been trying to recreate. Their human hybrids. They've tried to implant them with technology that's artificial intelligence, but they're trying to create a hybrid man and robot. Of course this is never going to work because technology is heavier and more crude and under-evolved from the very light cellular structure of human life. You've got mineral, animal, and human, and everything is an evolutionary jump and what the Earth wants to produce as its offspring. So the human has a fused 2-3 chromosomes. The second chromosome is fused, and the pre-Adamic or six-fingered race, or they call it Homo compensis, does not have this fusion. They've got 24 chromosomes in their DNA. Also 24 pairs. Also they have 5 fingers, not 4 fingers, and an opposable thumb. That's why they call the humans evolving from monkeys, because monkeys have an opposable thumb. Of course our DNA is totally different than apes. The Adamic six-fingered race is more likely evolved, if anybody involved, if any humanoid evolved from the ape world. But this evolution is a very ancient belief system. It was not invented by Darwin. Darwin stole it from the Hindus. You can go to the Hindu temples and you can see every level, the lower level or the lower animals, and then as you go up the evolutionary ladder the creatures get more evolved into human creatures or angels. Same with Aristotle. Aristotle wrote about human evolution, so Darwin just stole the idea and made science, made religion into a science. That's their religion. Evolution is a religious idea that man evolved into becoming a god, and Caesar believed he was a god or equal to God who made this world. This is their belief. They believe is a Utah Mormon religious idea. My parents spoke of the Elohim. We called God Elohim. What was God's name? Always Elohim, no Elohim or gods, multiple gods. And you'll see the Utah Mormons believe that Joseph Smith taught this notion. Joseph Smith did not, but they overlaid all their fake history onto the early Joseph Smith, who was a Sephardic Jew. Early Jews were actual Christians, the fake Jews, and now how really just Roman Babylonian Mithraic cult. They are the pagan cult of Rome. They're ritualistic. That's why they have a million laws on their books on how many steps you can walk across the street on a Sunday. Can you reach your arm inside a window to give your neighbor something on Sunday? No, but your neighbor can reach outside the eye. I mean, every little aspect of their life is ritualized into rocking type of autistic presentations. This is the early pre-Adamic races with a brain. If you look at it, looks like it's been hit in the head. You can't tell any difference between an autistic brain, a schizophrenic brain, a head trauma, or whatever. It has a hollow core in which the right side no longer has a bridge to communicate to the left side of the brain, and therefore you classically have the brains talking in voices to each other. This was the bicameral brain theory, that when the bicameral brain broke down from a unitary brain, that's when the gods start speaking to humans in their head. And so people who have endured head trauma or PTSD for more Will's heart start hearing voices and auditory and visual hallucinations. This is because of brain damage. It's when the filter has been damaged in the brain and you start receiving, like a bad radio receiver, all sorts of strange receptions, chaotic receptions from the universe. Instead of your radio receiver being dialed to the correct degree, it is a little excuse. So it wavers between two different radial frequencies, and that's why we start to see and hear voices and visual hallucinations when there's been trauma to the brain, or like now, chemical trauma, such as with our medical interventions, which are damaging the human system. Everything by these strange Elohim cult has been to destroy humanity and women. They despise women, and you will see every patriarchal religion enslaves women, and even in the Bible they call all women prostitutes. Women are considered simply a prostitute, to be enslaved and used and abused, and their children are to be used and abused. And if you grow into an Elohim, a man, and then you have no conscience, just like the military. Once you get addicted to the blood rituals of killing, it's hard for the Y chromosome to disengage. It's just like any other addiction, just like a bad P*** addiction, but this unfortunately is a bad war addiction of rape and killing, which becomes addictive to the military. And as long as we have this Y chromosome ruling the earth in their patriarchal psychopathy, we will never engage in a peaceful cooperative earth, just as the way it is. As long as hive brain military operations and obey orders, we will have nothing but a world of enslavement and whores.